Well, hello there, and welcome to the first day of summer. It is officially the first day of summer if you're listening to this on June 20th, 2024. It's the June solstice. Begins today at 4:51 p.m. East. If you're listening to it the day after or any other time, happy summer, everybody. Welcome to the show. I've got a great couple of guests, two authors, journalists joining me to talk about their new book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Two brilliant women, Louise Story and Ebony Reed, both join me today. That conversation begins at 18 minutes and 36 seconds. If you want to skip ahead, but I know you don't, and I'm happy to have you here and to do the news with you. I hope to see you tonight at our hangout. After all, it is Thursday. On Thursdays at 8 p.m. East, I almost always host a hangout for paid subscribers. So I hope to see you tonight, and I appreciate you being here today. Yesterday, I got an email from James who said about my guest, Andrew Seidel. Outstanding show with Andrew Seidel. Thank you for getting him on. So much good and unsettling information. He's now officially on my favorites list. This episode definitely deserves another listen, and we'll do so tomorrow. And as always, thank you for another interesting news recap. I look forward to them now more than ever before, as I've been cutting back on mainstream news to preserve what's left of my sanity. Be well. James, thank you very much. I hear you, and I need to do the same sometimes. I won't even do the news for a couple days or even a week at a time, and I'm sorry when those happen. It is not today, however. I've got your news for you right now. Let's get after it. Headlines, sound, and then to my interview. Speaking of Andrew Seidel, yesterday he mentioned this story out of Louisiana that came down yesterday. Louisiana requiring now all public classrooms to display 10 Commandments. The law was signed by their Republican governor, Jeff Landry, Wednesday, and makes the state the only one with such a mandate. Critics, of course, have vowed a constitutional challenge, like Americans United. This is what Christian nationalism looks like. This is the beginning. John Fugelsang, our friend, perfect to talk about this, and I'll try to get him on, tweets, fundamentalist Christians are putting the 10 Commandments in Louisiana public schools. Now their kids will know God is deeply offended by stealing, coveting thy neighbor's wife, coveting thy neighbor's goods, adultery, and bearing false witness. And this November, those kids will watch their parents vote for Donald Trump. All right, well, we'll certainly talk more about that story out of Louisiana at the Hangout and in the coming days with guests. The Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un are hanging out, which is a pretty fun idea. They signed a new pact Wednesday that includes a pledge of mutual defense if either is attacked. The agreement was sealed at a summit in North Korea during a rare visit by Putin to the reclusive nuclear-armed state as both countries face growing confrontations with the West. The White House and the leader of Israel, not on the same page. The United States says Benjamin Netanyahu, they have no idea what the Israeli prime minister is talking about when he said that Washington is withholding weapons and ammunitions from its close ally over the past few months. The Biden administration on Tuesday rejected the accusation and disinvited him to the White House. So that relationship continues to fray. Yesterday, news came out from the Congressional Budget Office that it projects this year's federal budget deficit to be $400 billion higher, a 27% increase compared to its original estimate released in February. I urge you to go back and listen to my conversation with Stephanie Kelton on modern monetary theory. How about that for you, Sandman? I'm sure that Republicans will soon pretend to care about the deficit very soon as well. We found out yesterday that Donald Trump's spiritual advisory committee member, Robert Morris, has resigned as the senior pastor at Gateway Church in South Lake, Texas, 3 days after confessing to engaging in sexual behavior with a child over the course of a few years in the 80s. The board of elders at Gateway made the announcement Tuesday in a statement to NBC News and other outlets. The heat wave is setting new temperature records across the East Coast. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you anything about that, but very high temperatures forecast for 11 cities at the core of the heat dome as it nears peak intensity from Indianapolis to D.C. to Buffalo, expected to reach level 4 heat risk, the highest level risk to human health. Good luck out there, everybody. I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. And wildfires are breaking out in New Mexico and California. More than 1,400 structures have been destroyed in New Mexico, and an early start to the U.S. wildfire season seems to be in full swing, according to ABC News in the West. That's who's saying this. As it blazes in New Mexico, California firefighters juggling challenges from 5 major fires burning at both ends of the state. Keep an eye on those, of course. And it's Thursday. We should be hearing something from the Ayatollahs at the Supreme Court, and we'll be talking with Eric Siegel and others if we do. And finally, a Fox News poll. I never mention polling, but if it's a Fox News poll and it shows Joe Biden on top, I'll mention that as good news a week before the big debate, which I will be hosting a debate party. So I look forward to seeing you here or wherever here is. I don't know. I'll be here and you'll be wherever you are. But RFK Jr. sadly did not make the requirements to be at the debate. But I do hope to see you on the 27th. Because it's a Thursday anyway. We'll figure it out. All right. Those are your headlines. That's what I've got for you here. Let's get to some of the sound clips, audio from yesterday. First of all, here is the former First Lady, the greatest of all time. It's Michelle Obama on Juneteenth with a little message I wanted to share.
Juneteenth is all about celebrating our collective freedom and fighting to protect it. Our power, our rights, and even our planet are on the ballot this year. So now is the time to think about how you're going to make your voice heard in this election. Head over to whenweallvote.org. Get yourself registered to vote and then text 3 friends to do the same. Do not sit on the sidelines this year because this is a critical moment for all of us. Get ready to make your voice heard today.
All right. Check it out at whenweallvote.org and tell your friends whenweallvote.org/register. All right. Let's head over to CNN because there was an interesting debate between the former governor there and one of the leading activists and organizers in Wisconsin, Ben Wickler and what was his name? Yeah, Scott Walker were on with Abby Phillips last night. Of course, Wisconsin, a swing state, a battleground state, hosting the RNC in Milwaukee, which their nominee says is a shithole. But here's the brilliant Ben Wickler, the guy that makes me think we can win Wisconsin.
And although President Trump and you, Governor, broke ground with golden shovels on a factory that went up in smoke, we actually are right now constructing this AI data center in Racine County that will bring thousands of family-supporting jobs. And that's the difference between promises like the infrastructure bill that never materialized under Trump and delivering for Wisconsinites. What you see under President Biden, thousands upon thousands of manufacturing jobs in the state of Wisconsin. This is a jobs boom. And a president who's focused on fighting special interests to bring costs down, starting with big drug companies. We've already brought the cost of insulin for people on Medicare down to $35 a month. He wants to do the same thing for everyone who needs insulin and go to other drugs besides. This is a president who actually knows what it takes to get things done. And what we've seen from Trump over and over is big talk, big promises, and in the end, he only focuses on himself.
Meanwhile, over on Earth 2 and Newsmax, which apparently lost like $40 million last year, here is one of the crazy Republican congressmen insurrectionists. His name is Tim Burchett. Listen to this.
That they can make something up out of whole. Here's the videotape. Everybody can see it. Everybody can see him wander off. There is no parachutist over there in the video. You've got news anchors saying, "Oh, there are the parachuters in the video over there off camera," but they're not there, and they say it anyway. I mean, it's if there's an old saying in the propaganda world that a lie told once remains a lie. A lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. And the Democrat Party, honestly, has grown comfortable with telling the big lie and telling it so many times that their media allies carry their water for them from that point forward. And then the polls show that a majority of Americans may believe the big lie that the Democrats are peddling, right?
Absolutely. And they're a box checker of a press, I can't even remember her name, Jean-Pierre, whatever. They ought to put her on the dadgum Saturday Night Live and just give her the full show of just doing a regular press conference. So this thing is ridiculous that they have to go back and explain to us what we just saw, and then their hired heads get on there and further the lie. It's to me it just, what are they going to do? I still think they're going to pull the governor of California in on the deal. and put him in because of his deal he cut with Hollywood over unemployment. I just, they're going to recreate somebody, and that would be who Hollywood could do the best job with.
Well, you may be right. We'll see. We'll see if you're right, Congressman Burchett. Her name, of course, is Karine Jean-Pierre. She is the White House press secretary, and that was him. I think she's the first black White House press secretary, black woman. And on Juneteenth, there you go, Tim Burchett doesn't even try to get her name. But I just thought that was an interesting view, a terrifying view into Earth 2 when you hear that anchor saying what he said, the way he said it, using the language really of now the progressives and the lefts, the big lie, turning it back on them. Wow, that was pretty mind-blowing. All right, let me try to move on if I can gather myself. Let's head back to Earth 1, where it was CNN last night. Caitlin Collins hosted Ellie Honig and Jennifer Rogers to talk a little bit about what happened in Louisiana with the Ten Commandments, the legality, the constitutionality of it. And what if this case makes it all the way up to the Ayatollahs? What are they going to say?
And it's just notable that this is what they're saying has to be in each classroom. Yeah. But my first question was, is requiring this regardless of size, does it violate the First Amendment?
Yes, flagrantly, in my view. If you wanted a perfect example of what the First Amendment prohibits, I think this is it. The First Amendment says Congress, government, shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, meaning state entities can't do things that endorse any particular religion or religiosity in general. And if you look at those 10, there are some, I know one of the defenses is, well, these are themes that are consistent throughout civilized society and throughout religion. Shall not kill. Number 6, I'm cheating because I'm looking. But, don't kill, don't rob, don't steal, that kind of thing. But there are some commandments that are inherently religious. Observe the Sabbath day. I'm the only God that you may worship. So it's an inherently religious document. I should add, this came up before. In 1980, there was a case out of Kentucky in the Supreme Court, almost the exact same facts, and the Supreme Court said unconstitutional.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because Governor Landry said basically he couldn't wait to be sued. He was bracing for that. The ACLU weighed in tonight, said they are suing. They've made that pledge in a tweet tonight. If this does go up to the Supreme Court, which is what we have seen a lot of conservative groups try to have happen, what is the reception compared to 1980? Is it a friendlier court to an argument like having the Ten Commandments up in a classroom than it was before?
Yeah, so I think it is a friendlier court. The problem is it's unlike some of the cases that we've seen in recent years where they have pushed to the right on this issue. So the case from a couple of years ago with the public high school football coach who prayed before the games, that's a conflict between his free exercise of religion and everyone else who says it's an Establishment Clause violation. We don't want that religion to be foisted onto us. So when you have those two things in conflict, this court has consistently ruled for the individual who says they're exercising their right. You don't have that side of it here. This is the legislature saying, here's the religion that we're putting in front of all school children. We don't care if they're Christian, Muslim, if they're atheists. They all have to look at this religious document. You don't have a person saying this is violating my individual religious freedom rights. So given that it's one-sided, I don't see how they possibly rule for that non-existent proponent. I think it's a clear violation.
So do you believe it ultimately gets struck down?
I do.
Well, I hope she's right. All right. Now let's move on to the next and final clip before we get to some comedy. This is a parent at a school board, and I like to play these clips. Thank you to Benny in Florida for sending it to me. Now, this specific school is in the district of Gateway Church Robert Morris, who has just stepped down after he is admitted to molesting a child. And Robert Morris endorsed many on the school board. And I just think this guy makes so many great points about the national conversation and ridiculous sickness of this argument. So I'll give him the mic. Yeah. Oh, man. That was good. That guy on Twitter, by the way, is Big Papa 929. His name is Mike Quinn, and maybe I'll get him on the show because I want to highlight and platform guys like that. So if you know anybody, you see anybody that is going to your school board, if it's you, come on, talk to me about it. All right. Now, finally, let's go to the comedy. As promised, this is Jimmy Kimmel yesterday on ABC's Live with Jimmy Kimmel. Is that the name of the show? Jimmy Kimmel Live. Sorry.
We got more details about the state of Trump's big, beautiful brain from the author of a new book about The Apprentice. Ramin Satuda said he interviewed Trump on multiple occasions, some in person, and that even though they spoke at length about his old TV show, Trump had trouble remembering who he was.
So my first down was in May. He wasn't doing a lot of interviews. And then we sat down again towards the end of the summer. And when I sat down, there was a very blank expression on his face. So I asked, do you remember when we spoke recently? And he said, no, I have no memory of that. And he couldn't recall. He said it was a long time ago. And then we had to start from scratch. So the interview started from square one, where he started telling me the same exact stories that I heard in our first interview.
I don't know about that. It's not like him to repeat himself. It really doesn't. Trump, of course, denied that vehemently. His spokesperson called the writer a nobody and a loser, which I guess is why he took time to do interviews with him. One with the nobody and one with the loser. Person, woman, man, camera, it's all there. And not only did Fat Albert Einstein repeat himself, he also made a claim that indicates lying and the dementia might be starting to team up.
He confidently told me and declared that Joan Rivers voted for him when he ran for president, and Joan Rivers died in 2014, so she would not have been able to vote for Donald Trump.
So he's right. Dead people are voting. Maybe she voted with her Ouija board. I don't know.
Yes, there you go. I thought that was good, and I always like to end on a laugh. All right, let's get to my guests on today's show. Very excited to have both of them joining me here on the podcast for the first time. Now, I'd interviewed Louise Story when she was at the Wall Street Journal a couple times, I think at the New York Times as well, but I'd never talked to Ebony Reed. She is a seasoned journalist who's led coverage and operations at The Plain Dealer in Cleveland, the Detroit News, the Associated Press, and the Wall Street Journal. She's the chief strategy officer at the Marshall Project, a news outlet focused on the justice system, and she teaches at Yale School of Management. And so does Louise Story, who, of course, is a prize-winning investigative journalist who spent more than 15 years at New York Times and Wall Street Journal, where she was a top masthead editor. Her investigative reporting has led to the largest kleptocracy forfeiture in U.S. history, a multi-billion-dollar settlement in the derivatives market, and to Goldman Sachs' SEC settlement following the 2008 financial crisis. Her film, The Kleptocrats, aired on BBC, Apple, and Amazon, and she is obviously, they're both obviously great journalists. So having two great journalists like them work together on a book like this, which is such an important issue, is really credible, obviously. And I think you'll hear that in my interview with them. I had all kinds of audio issues because there was a mic problem when I recorded. Hopefully I fixed it all in post. It was a real pain in the butt. So if you hear anything, please forgive me and be patient. I think this is pretty good in the end, quality-wise. But in terms of the content of the conversation, real good stuff. 15 cents on the dollar. How Americans made the black-white wealth gap. Let's do it right now with Louise Story and Ebony Reed. There they are, Louise, Ebony, welcome to Stand Up. Louise, welcome back. It's been way too long since we talked to Ebony for the first time. I'm so excited to talk to both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I figured it for listeners who aren't familiar with you, your work, or the subject that we're about to get into, which is obviously so serious and so important, I thought it might be interesting to have you talk about the other one. You co-authored this book. You lived in this book. You lived basically with all the people that you talked to. You got to know. It must have been so intimate, so personal and challenging. So I'll start with you, Louise. How did you meet Ebony, and what was it like to work on this really important issue and book with her?
Ebony and I met at the Wall Street Journal. We worked together there. We were working together in the summer of 2020. And that's what kicked off our conversations about these racial issues and the similarities in our lives, because there are many, but also the differences, and the differences are tied to race. And I'll just say, working with Ebony, I'm this kind of blunt New Yorker sometimes, and I just say what I think. And Ebony really makes people come out of all the conversations feeling great with her. And I learned from her also how to put just a little more sugar on the message sometimes. Often I would say to her, oh, do you want to just tell this person this? And it would go really well. And I'm so grateful to have worked with you, Ebony.
Ebony, what on earth is she talking about?
Just a little Southern charm. I was born in Louisville and I live in Kansas City, Missouri. But I will tell you, it has been a complete honor and pleasure to have worked with Louise on this project. I can't imagine having done it with anyone else. Louise is resilient. She is tough. She doesn't give up. She chases things down to the last second. Her precision and accuracy, it has been an amazing experience.
I love it. I think we'll just keep doing this.
It's great. Yeah. Thank you.
I worried. I was like, oh, this will be my clever question at the top. And then I go, what if they hate each other?
No, we've partnered for 3 years and the partnership has gone phenomenally well. And we've learned so much in the partnership too. And we started friends and we're ending friends and we're respectful partners. And it's a beautiful thing.
It is.
No, that's so nice and sincere. And I love that you're both, that's been the experience and that you've learned so much from each other. Just one more, just general question. Louise, how do you, and for you, Ebony, even though it's a racial question, I'm sure you learned a lot through all of this. But Louise, first for you, how do you approach as a white person this issue, how Americans made the black-white wealth gap? How did you come to that? You're a longtime reporter. I know you understand journalism, but this is a really hard issue.
Yes, I did first of all approach it as a journalist. And as a journalist, what you do is you listen deeply to what other people have to say and try to really understand, ask good questions, see things from a variety of points of views, and make people comfortable sharing with you. I will add, though, as a person and as a white person, I pulled on lessons I've learned all my life back to childhood when I went to a public elementary school that was about 40% Black students and the rest white. The town of Eatonville was in my school district where Zora Neale Hurston's from. And I've recognized now later in life that my experiences as a child with many Black Americans and amazing Black American teachers were formative in my comfort and my appreciation for all people.
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. I often just think about the fact that the first school bus I got onto was like half Black. And I didn't think about it then, but I think a lot about it now. And in terms of what you experience when you're really young or at any other age. Ebony, obviously, you've grown up Black in America. You're also a journalist, so you covered so many of these issues. But I'm guessing you learned a tremendous amount, even though you have that both professional and personal experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I learned some things even about my own family that we might talk about in the research. But I would say I hadn't been out doing like on the ground reporting for a while because I'd been more in an editing role and an administrative role more recently. Louise had more recent reporting experience. And I will tell you that some things have changed with technology from the last time I was out as a reporter. And one of the things that surprised me was the people we interviewed. You talk about it being intimate, 3 years. Like we really got to know them, but they got to know us and they Googled us and they followed us in social and they knew all about us. So when we called people, one of the things that surprised me was how much they already knew about me coming in to interview them.
Yeah, you must have had to. We don't really need to get into it, but good journalists have to work really hard to establish credibility. Even if you look up your byline and see all the amazing things the two of you have done, these are such important, and they were personal issues, certainly, obviously, to the people that you wrote about. Let's talk about that. Louise, how did you do this book? You picked specific people. You focused a lot on Atlanta. We can talk about why that does and doesn't matter. But talk about what the reader is going to learn, how you did this book, and then just give it a minute or two, whatever you want. And then Ebony, just pick up and add to how you guys researched and wrote this book over these years and who you looked at. Louise?
Thank you. So first, we examined the data and looked at the data throughout history through some different research. And we both teach at the Yale School of Management. We teach MBA students about racial wealth gaps across all races. And from that work, we determined what points in history we thought were really important to include in the book. And then as journalists who capture stories of people, we knew we wanted to have people with interesting things going on in their lives between 2020 and 2023 who also had families who had interesting experiences that we could document, 1850s to the present. So we did about 400 interviews in depth, many of them about 2 to 3 hours, many much longer ones with the people we landed on. And we found the people who had very interesting things going on between 2020 and 2023. So you're going to want to follow what happens, but where we also could document their grandparents and find that they had a grandparent who was in Freedman's Bank, or they had a grandparent who had land taken away, and we learned things about their families they didn't know.
Ebony, you want to go and talk specifically about some of those people? Because I just basically, all the ones that were public that I didn't know about, I went and did a deep dive on. I'm following them on social, and I'm really interested in their whole lives. I'm Wikipediaing Andrew Young, obviously knew who he was, but I was like, wait, he did this, he did that, he's doing this. Obviously his affiliation with the bank. Who do you want to talk about and add to how you did this book?
Sure. We can talk about as many of them as you'd like. I'll start with Brooke Bacon. He is a Black man that lives in New Hampshire. Earlier in his life, he lived in Georgia, where he has family in eastern Georgia, Scrubbin County. His mother moved around a lot in different jobs when he was little so that she could find better economic opportunities. Sometimes they had to stay with friends and didn't have their own. Ultimately, they ended up on the East Coast, lived in Boston. Fast forward to his college years. He was in college. He had enough money to get in the first semester. And then his mom was also in college, too, at the same time, because she was working to improve herself so she could have a college degree. And he needed a cosigner, and the school hadn't told him that he would need a cosigner. That's what he told Louise and I. And he ended up having to leave school because he didn't have a cosigner. So he left with that debt. And that's actually one of the things that I found most crushing for many Black Americans. One, Black Americans tend to carry more student loan debt. And then there are people who carry the debt who didn't finish a degree. So now they have the debt, but they don't have the chance to get the higher earning wages. In the summer of 2020, Brooke was living his life. He had married a white woman, and he was living in New Hampshire. And he got a call that his father had been killed by the police. So now for the first time, he was grappling with his Black roots, and he talks with us and shares that journey that he went on. And so Louise and I met Brooke in the fall of 2021. He was on a 63-mile justice walk to bring attention to his father's case. And we walked half of that 30 miles over 3 days with him to learn and to really understand what he was going through and to meet his family.
Nobody can question your dedication to the people that you interview. Oh my gosh, that is intense. Louise, we can do this all day, talk about the people, and I want to get into more of them, but I realize I should have asked even before, although I'm so interested specifically in each person, the issue at hand. And there's so much there, but I think we do have to define some words. And I don't want to bore anybody, but what does wealth mean? You ask that in a scholarly way in the classroom. You can ask that in a more casual way on a podcast like this. I can answer it in my Buddhist spiritual way. But I think the most important part is how you unpack what it means to inherit wealth and what a difference that means, and specifically in America. But how do you both want to talk about the wealth gap and define it in a scholarly and journalistic way, which is what you do throughout?
First of all, thank you. People need to know what wealth is, and people are often confused about what it is. They often mix up wealth with income. And you don't know how many people we've said, and we're writing this book about the black-white wealth gap, and they say, oh, the person sitting next to me at work of a different race, they make the same income, so what's the issue?
Right.
But wealth is different from income. Income is a flow you get, and you can save some of that income and start to build wealth. But wealth is what you have. It's your net worth. It's all the stuff that you own minus what you owe. And so if you see someone and they've got a house, it doesn't mean they're wealthy necessarily. They might have a lot of debt on that house. And so it's just not very well understood. But once you know what wealth is, then you have to know what the gap is and what the data is. And the reason we called our book 15 cents on the dollar is because the typical Black household has 15 cents in wealth compared to $1 in wealth held by the typical white family. It's 15 cents on the dollar. And in fact, that's where it stood in the 1950s. It's moved around since then. It's gone up and down. And so we are on a mission to make 15 cents on the dollar a nationally recognized statistic, because that can change conversations.
Ebony, so often people believe, I've been hearing this for as long as I've been doing this work, talking to and listening to people, calling in my own radio show, old radio show. In America, everybody has the same opportunity. It's the land of the free. We all have the same opportunity. And I guess even if you did believe that, like in Louise's example, you're working next to a black person, they might get paid equal or even more than you. That does not determine what we're talking about in terms of wealth, but it also is complete myth, because the truth is it's about opportunity. And you guys document so much about where there are missed, lacked, or purposely prevented opportunities for black folks in America throughout history. I thought one thing that was really interesting to kind of make this argument and debunk that myth was serving in the military and what the GI Bill meant. Because if two guys, a black guy and a white guy, went to war for America in World War II and they didn't get similar benefits on the way out, that seems like a pretty good measure. Talk to me about what you learned there.
Absolutely. So the GI Bill, as you mentioned, was established in our country to benefit all veterans who fought in World War II, regardless of race. And at the time the GI Bill was created, it helped veterans buy homes, start businesses, go to college. While it was a federal program, it was administered at the local level. So that meant that however people felt locally, that would influence who could use the GI Bill. So there are the majority of Black Americans who were veterans in World War II were not able to use the GI Bill. And so one example, when we look at housing, purchasing homes, there are some estimates that say less than 3% of Black GIs were able to use the GI Bill to buy a home. And this is really important because white veterans who were able to use it were able to set their family up to move into middle class, to develop generational wealth, to reap the benefits of home ownership. And for Black families who missed out on that, we're talking multiple generations, years and years of not owning a home. We talked with people that maybe their family was able to buy a home, but 30 years later, 20 years later, that's a long time to wait. I will share something with you that I found out in the reporting that was surprising for myself relating to the GI Bill, but it is not the common experience. And it is not what most Black Americans experienced who were veterans, who were not, because they were not able to use the GI Bill. And we document that in the book with family after family. But I will tell you that on one day, after I had a long day of talking to so many families that were not able to use it, Black families, and I was frustrated, I said to one of my aunts, I hope someday I will meet a Black American who was a descendant of someone who actually used the GI Bill, part of that 3%, and be able to understand what their experience was and how that impacts their economic trajectory. And that's when she let me know. She reminded me, my grandfather fought in World War II. He used the GI Bill to purchase a home for my family that he lived in with my grandmother. And I am that person that I was looking for. And so that helped me understand a little bit about my own economic trajectory. But I'll tell you, people who read this book will take them on a journey as they think about their own families and their own economic journeys.
Yes, I'm on the journey right now as I'm reading it. It's you're absolutely right. You think about your entire family and you don't, by the way, most of us don't even know. I don't know what my grandparents' financial windfalls or misgivings or mistakes were necessarily.
You know what, Pete? I don't know if you got to this part yet. You could look up, if you know their names, your family members in 1860 and 1870. The government census back then, the federal census, asked people their wealth. Just where you fall in that.
I want to do that. I think my dad's side wasn't here yet, but my mom's side certainly was. It's really interesting and really important to think about. And you do, as a reader, want to think about that. Louise, you've covered the banks, all the time. I don't know how much you covered or wrote about Black-owned banks, but you feature Greenwood Bank specifically, and you talk about banking, and you guys talk a lot about lending and lack of opportunity and obvious discriminatory policies from banks. And it's really easy to know what happened as we lived through it in the financial crisis after 2008 and the housing bubble burst and so on, which you also touch on. But talk to me about what role banks play in the book, in the gap. This we could fill up the next 45 minutes on, but whatever you want to say about lending and specifically Greenwood or anything else.
I'll highlight just a couple things. One is that you may have heard just in popular conversation that a high percentage of Black Americans are not banked, that they're underbanked. And you may have heard that there's some distrust of the banking system. So we cover Freedmen's Bank, which is back in the 1800s, which was backed, the U.S. government set it up for formerly enslaved people and then lost their money. So that's just an interesting way for people to understand why through the generations, so many Black families put their money in a money belt or under their pillow or in their couch. We also cover Black banking, and we cover efforts, for example, in the 1960s with Freedom National Bank, which Jackie Robinson set up.
Yeah.
And that was set up to have community banks that would actually lend to their own community. Because before that in Harlem, there had been white banks there who were taking depositors' money from Black people and lending it out to white people downtown. So we cover that as an interesting story. And then we do cover the 2008 financial crisis with a lens on race and how it affected race. And I covered that in Contemporary Times. I covered the Wall Street part of that. And looking now at how it affected Hispanic and Black Americans is very interesting. And then, finally, we follow Greenwood Bank, as they were originally called, which is a fintech banking platform. And it was set up by Killer Mike, the rapper, and Andrew Young, the civil rights leader, with great intentions to try to help banking for Black Americans. In the course of our book, you see what happens in that they hit a lot of hurdles and they had a lot of difficulty finding a way to work with Black banks. And some of their customers were disappointed that years in, they weren't making mortgage loans available. And so it's not an easy path for Black banking. And this is one of the reasons that Black Americans have trouble moving forward their family's wealth.
Ebony, what would you add to any of what Louise just said?
Some other challenges that Black families have is home ownership. We touched upon that a little bit. Stock ownership. And of course, inheritance is one of the major drivers of wealth.
Inheritance is one of the major drivers of wealth. And what is that? How does that affect the Black-white wealth gap?
Inheritance doesn't just happen when people pass away and leave their assets behind. It also happens throughout their lives. So if someone has wealthy parents and they're able to help them with their first home purchase or help them go to college.
Right. And
more white people have wealth that they give to their children. There's more money in white Americans' hands. And so that's why it affects the Black-white wealth gap, that white parents are able to help their children with that money through their lives and upon death.
I feel like it's so important to talk about the causes. And at the beginning of the book, you have a section, you ask the question, who's to blame, government or business? You write, in recent years, a combination of public and private setbacks has continued. Predatory lending, the events of 2008 financial crisis were yet another set of harms brought by the government and private industry. Then there's the case of student loan debt, one of the most pressing current private-public problems, which has strong racial implications. Discrimination in hiring and promotions at private companies and unequal pay levels among racial groups are mostly business actions, but government agencies also haven't been great in their human resource practices. And then there's the differing access and behaviors around investing in the stock market and building companies that go public, which have business and education wound up with them. Like the backs of enslaved people who were whipped and scarred uncountable times, the difference in wealth between white and Black Americans is tied to many economic lashes, old and new. Wow, that's a powerful paragraph, Ebony. That is really a nuanced look in just one paragraph as to who's to blame. It's so easy for us to blame either private sector, banks, etc., racism in general, or the government, but it's not that simple, huh?
It's very complex. It's like a spider web. When you start to look at the Black-white wealth gap, there is so many factors, so many pieces to it. Like you said, it's education, it's lending, it's inheritance, it's also historical structures that have been set up in our country.
Let's now go to another one of the people that you featured, Louise, keeping it obviously really fascinating to take a look at who you looked at. Is it Tandrea Dixon?
Tandrea Dixon.
Tandrea. Tell me about her.
We met her at an online event for Greenwood Bank. So we were following along what happened with Greenwood Bank. And we wanted to meet the people who were signing up as customers so we could understand the problems and opportunities they had and why they wanted Greenwood to help them. So we interviewed tons of them, and there's many in the book. What struck us about Tandrea is that not only did she have financial needs she wanted to pursue, but she was very thoughtful and focusing in her life on the Black-white wealth gap. she was listening to a lot of financial podcasts. And a lot of people will say, I'd like to buy a house, but this was like her mission. And so we felt like through following what happened with her in the 3 years that we followed from 2020 through 2023, that we would see if she could make progress. We felt if anyone could, it would be her. She had a $100,000 job, but she didn't come from wealth. She was the first in her family to be out in a field picking a plant. And I don't want to give away the ending, but she wasn't able to reach many of the goals by the end of the book that she had set out. And you really see the setbacks despite her great earnest effort through the course of the book.
What did you learn, Ebony, if you can? Maybe this is a hard question to be put on the spot, but about resilience that you didn't already know. As I was reading it, I was just thinking about how I get when I feel bad for myself and how self-pity is really insidious, of course. But I don't get that feeling from the people that you write about as much in that a lot of times they pick themselves back up. But Tandria was one of those people who just setback after setback. And I'm thinking, man, I am so fragile. What did you learn in documenting, writing about these folks and how they deal with it?
I think readers will find that every single person in our book never gave up. And I think that's something that's very inspiring. Even at times I would think about it in my own personal life. We're interviewing people who are up against some tough situations, and they have not given up.
That's great to hear. That's the collective, the way that you look at all these folks, and a great inspiring thing to know about if you're going to read the book. What about Black-owned businesses? That seems such an obvious idea to support the people whose lives and communities you want to improve in. And if you live in a Black neighborhood, keep your money there, and true of any neighborhood. It's an interesting economic idea. It always feels to me like no matter who is coming up with it, support your own, support local even. It's okay, I will. And then you go over and buy cheaper tires in the neighborhood next door, or you order them online, etc. But I wonder how the theory has evolved in Black communities. And I wonder, as I read the book, if it's actually effective, if it actually works. Talk to me, I guess we'll start with you, Ebony, about the idea of supporting Black-owned businesses, investing in Black-owned businesses, and how it works and how sometimes maybe it doesn't, counterintuitively.
So we cover some historic communities in our book, one being Tulsa, which was a very strong Black business community in our country before it was burned down in the Tulsa massacre. At that time, the money was in that community. So one of the things that happened with segregated communities, and also prior to us having some of the technology we have today, like you mentioned, people are buying their goods on Amazon. We cover this in the book. It is a lot more challenging today to have money circulating in just one pocket, just in one community, just in one place.
Also, thought it was really interesting just the way that you help the reader, if they don't already know how much more expensive it is to be poor, Louise. It's so much harder to get a home loan, a car loan. You're paying more, and you try to make it look fair. Someone's loaning you money, they're taking a risk. They want to get their money back, so they're taking a bigger risk. But that can be perpetuated generationally, obviously. But talk a little bit about how much harder it is to be Black and even middle class, much less poor, and trying to move up and borrow money.
Yes, I would love to talk about risk-based pricing in our economy. Companies charge more money if they categorize a person as being, quote, risky. And some of that riskiness that they put on an individual's file may come from something that individual has done, but sometimes it comes from really atmospheric factors that have nothing to do with the person's behavior. A really good example is automobile insurance. So that is not priced based on race, but it is priced based in part on zip code where people live. And zip codes with higher crime rates, people who live there have to pay more in auto insurance. So just think about that for a minute, Pete. Someone's worked really hard. They finally saved enough money to purchase a car, and they go to get their auto insurance. And because of where they live, which is maybe where they can afford to live, or they want to be with their family, or whatever reason, they have to pay more in auto insurance than a really wealthy person in a wealthy neighborhood does. So you can see why the auto insurer wants the money, but is it that person's fault that there's more crime in their zip code. And so one of the things our society could think about, it would really have to be a public and private discussion, because we have a capitalist private market where companies charge for risk, but could think about is who should bear some of these risks? Should this individual person in the zip code pay more just because he lives there?
Great example. Perfect example. Ebony, you guys thread the needle, identify the problem of the wealth disparities in general. And when measured on the racial gap, if some few Black Americans are doing really well, you could maybe be looking at the statistics and say, oh, the racial gap is narrowing, things are getting better. But you talk delicately, and I'm muddling through the problem, which is when you try to fix these things, if there's only a few Black folks that are getting very wealthy, if wealth concentration is only at the top within the Black community, then that's still terrible for Black folks. Help me explain that in the scholarly journalistic way and make me shut up, please.
So when people say that they want to fix the Black-white wealth gap, or they want to improve things for Black Americans, one of the questions that we asked in the reporting of this book is for who? And that's really important, because when companies say, oh, we're trying to improve things, it's really important to look at who they're saying that they're trying to improve things for, and then to go back and see, is what they intended to do really happening? Yes, you can improve things economically for people at the top, for Black Americans at the top, and that could pull the mean or the average up if you improve things for people at the top. But you're right, that doesn't necessarily mean that things will be changed for people who are not at the top. And so that is something that we cover through the chronicling of the lives of people in this book.
Louise, how do you give the whole nation a fair shake if you're mostly looking at people that live in Atlanta, as fascinating as it is?
The book does include people in other places like New Hampshire, for example, and Tandre, who you brought up before, grew up in North Carolina and lives there through most of the book. And we interviewed people around the whole country and found that these stories are very common. And we have a chapter on Oklahoma, for example. The book moves around in space, but we also were thinking not only of the historical, analytical, and factual points, but also about the readability of this book, because we want this book to be read by so many different people who can't put it down. And part of a great readable book is a book that has a nexus on a place. And so Atlanta made sense for that. It helps the book be coherent, but the stories are true. These are national stories, and they reflect really people across the whole country.
Yeah, and it really I've spent a good amount of time in Atlanta, and it's a fascinating place, but it's a very segregated place too, in a lot of ways, both racially and when it comes to socioeconomics, it would seem.
If Atlanta, called the Black Mecca, can't get it right, where can you? If Atlanta, just in our book we cover, they had a wealthy community there, largely white community, Buckhead, trying to break off of the city. Yeah. But this is what's going on in Atlanta. The nation should be talking about it.
Yes. And it is so readable. The book is so readable. I have not been able to put it down. I've really enjoyed it and started promoting it a lot earlier than a lot of other things I do, just because I've been reading it so much and loving it and skipping around as I always do. And at the end, you talk about solutions, and I just wanted to just mention them, what you say, and just maybe go into one or two. But you say, first, support more transparency into the wealth distribution in our country. Second, ask who benefits from new government or company policies. Third, pay attention to conversations around risk and pricing. Fourth, when someone says they want to close a wealth gap, ask for which people, which I think is always a fun thing to do at dinner. Fifth, and finally, be open to change. I saw a little of the efforts I've made in my life with all of those things, and that made me feel good. And then I learned I could do more, I could do better. But a lot of this stuff is, as the first, before you even say those, they're personal choices and behaviors, and putting your energy, your vote, your activity, and obviously your money where your mouth is. Ebony, say a little bit more about how the listener, much less the reader, changes the way they live, think, or spend their time, money, and resources, and just think about the wealth gap in general.
Sure. Another recommendation that we have for people, is a personal recommendation, is that they work in partnership with another person who is different from them on a significant project or initiative at some point in their life. And we think if more people, Louise and I agree on this, if they did this, then they would really understand other people's perspectives, experiences, and it would change conversations in our country. So to the visual eye, Louise and I are of different races, but also I live in Kansas City, Missouri. She's based on the East Coast. She's married and has 3 children. I'm unmarried and was widowed in the pandemic. And so we've had to work through family structures, different aspects of our life to create this book. And that meant that we had to think about equality meant. What did it mean to come together on this book? And so we had to think through how we would spend our money and our time. And we think that doing this for more people would be certainly helpful and bridge conversations in our country.
Louise, I've tried my whole life to open doors and create opportunities for, especially specifically probably for, more importantly for people of color, LGBT people as well, I think, but I think I hadn't thought about that as much. You can't see it obviously as much. But let's say I'm this well-meaning white person of privilege, which I am, and I've opened those doors for people, and that's the part of having privilege. It's a part about being born who you are. It's like, just make sure you extend it to somebody else who didn't have it. But that seems virtuous and it seems uncomfortable. And maybe I don't know a young black person that's interested in this job or this opportunity. And if I go out and look around for somebody, it can be uncomfortable and weird to try to create opportunities sometimes. Have you encountered that? What advice do you have for other white folks in terms of just doing more to advocate for people who aren't like them, who aren't in their network, didn't go to their school, etc.?
People have to spend time with a big mix of people. If people are spending time mainly with people who look like them and are of their same economic level, and then they may not meet different people. And we all choose how to spend our time, and people can make different choices. People think about whether they go to church and where. People think about schools they choose for their children if they're choosing a school. People think about associations they're in. People choose what companies they work at sometimes, and different companies prioritize inclusivity more than others. And so you have to make a choice to be regularly around all kinds of people. And then when you're around people, really get to know them personally, listen, form meaningful relationships. And Ebony and I formed a meaningful relationship even before we decided to do this book. And that's how the book could happen. It wasn't like we barely knew each other and then we did this book. And then in the course of doing the book, we continued to get to know each other and navigated a lot of things together. And we found the kind of give and take and understanding we needed to have for each other's situations to make a partnership, even if it wasn't an identical partnership, but to make it a fair and equitable one. And so it's very doable for white people, for any people, but it takes effort and a commitment to talk with other people who are different from you.
Ebony, in the same question, I want to narrow the wealth gap. I want to give other people similar opportunities that I've had. What should I do? What works? This is not necessarily a law or a policy or even a person you can vote for. Obviously, we're always talking about that. But what about on the personal side?
Some of the people that we interviewed have talked with us about mentorship and how that has impacted their lives as a way to be connected with different people. I would pose the question of who is mentoring you and who are you mentoring? And I think that also speaks to networks, just as Louise mentioned.
Talking to you guys is awesome and very intimidating because you're Yale business author journalists who have won a lot of things and had a lot of respect. So I hope that it was good enough because this book is so important. It's one of those books that is an interview where you're like, I can't talk about it. Just read the book. You should read this book. I can't talk. There's no way to do the justice, the people's lives who you got to know and the way you wrote about them. And I already feel like I failed, but I hope people will read the book. And I'm so grateful that you joined me and good luck on the book tour. And thank you very much.
Pete, you did a great job.
Thank you. All right, Louise and Ebony, they're awesome, huh? How about it? There they go. I hope you appreciated that. I hope you'll go get this book. I hope you'll think more about it, talk more about it, learn more about it. I will. along with you, and we can talk about it all at tonight's Hangout. Yeah, I hope to see you there Thursday nights, 8 p.m. This is a Thursday. We could talk about summer starting and the world ending, your world ending, whatever you want to talk about. We'll always find the joy and have our cups refilled, literally, metaphorically. I hope to see you there. Rate and review the show on Spotify and iTunes. Help promote the show however you can. We've built a really great community here, and I want to keep on building and doing this daily show for you, but I can't without your support. Feel free to upgrade those subscriptions anytime. Pay more if you're getting more. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I'm out. John Carroll is in.
Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand